Welcome to the meta map. So this is going to be a process that you want to use with an interaction with somebody else that the interaction isn't going well, or the interactions in the past haven't gone well. And there's a particular context that this interaction with this other person is about. So for example, if I was working with my husband on this one, the context might be about safety. So we have an ongoing debate about what is safe and what is not safe. And so we might use that context I might use that context as the sample or how I'm going to use this particular NLP process. So the meta map starts with obviously myself or yourself, and the other person, and identifying what the context is of the interaction that you're using this meta map for. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine what is the trait that makes the communication with this person difficult. And so it's what the other person's trait is. So what is it that they're doing, or what is it that happens in the communication with this person about this context that makes it difficult for you? And so going back to the example about my husband, if I think about him in this context and say to myself, okay, in the context of us talking about safety, what is it about him that in his trait that makes me upset or makes the communication with this person difficult? And for me, I would say that it's, I would originally say it was indifference, but maybe more accurately, it would be, I feel that there's a lack of empathy. And so that's where I would start. And I would write that first arrow that you see on your worksheet, I would write empathy up on that arrow so that I can understand that that's how I feel when we're talking about this particular context. Then you want to understand what is it that your behavior is doing from the other person's perspective. So if I stood in my husband's shoes in this particular situation, in this particular context about safety, how is my husband responding? When he sees what I'm doing or how I'm interacting, what from his perspective is my trait or my behavior like in this interaction about safety? So from his position, I imagine that my husband would be saying something to the effect that I'm overreacting. So that is something that it commonly comes up in this communication. And so he would be in a situation where he would say that I'm overreacting. So that arrow at the bottom, I would be writing in that arrow down at the bottom, overreaction. And so I understand that from my husband's perspective, the communication that I'm giving back to him is overreaction. And the communication, the top arrow that he gives to me is this sort of lack of empathy. All right, let's look further into this map. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, is there something within this interaction that causes a typical sequence? So for example, if I'm thinking my husband is not being empathetic and he's thinking I'm being overreactive, how do I respond to him thinking that I'm overreacting, or perhaps even saying that I'm overreacting? And so if my husband is saying that I'm overreacting, then for me, I'm getting upset with him because what I'm trying to tell him is it's not about me. You're missing this safety understanding. And so him saying that I'm overreacting. So now to be honest with you, I would be in a fearful situation because he believes that whatever it is that I think is a unsafe situation, he believes is safe. And so now I'm afraid. And so that top arrow, the second arrow, he thinks I'm overreacting. Now I'm fearful. Okay. And then if I put myself back into his place, and here's this person who's being afraid of something, me in this circumstance, how is he responding to that person who's being afraid? And so this is where my husband starts to withdraw because he doesn't know how to deal with that emotion. And so we wouldn't have an interaction or a sequence that would go beyond that. But for some people, the sequence continues. And so there's another loop both at the top and the bottom of the meta map. Now, your meta map doesn't have to have 3 arrows going around and around. And 1 is fine, and 2 is good, and 3, but if you have 6 of them, that's what the interaction is. And that's why we do this process, is to go into the mapping of what actually happens during the communication. Now, the next process that we're going to do is we're going to think about what happens with our inner selves in this interaction. And what this means is I need to kind of reflect of when I'm in this situation where I've become fearful, what is my inner self talking to me about? What does my inner self say to me? And so my inner self is going to be saying to me that this person can't be trusted. This person can't be trusted. So that's the inner self, what the inner self is going to be saying. And then my reaction to the inner self saying that is going to be the fact that I'm going to be also withdrawing from the situation because it's like the other person, I can't trust the other person. And so the best thing to do is not to do things with the person that I would be in a situation where I thought my safety was at jeopardy. And so that's how I would respond to my own inner dialogue. So on your worksheet, that's I believe it's number 5. How do you respond to your inner? So 4 and 5. So arrows back to inner self. And then we're also going to take a look at the other person. And what is the influence that's outside of the other person that they might have a influence that's causing them to act in a certain way. So this influence might be another person, for example, like a boss or a mother-in-law or something like that. This influence might be somebody that an actual person that has an influence over this person's behavior, or it might be their own inner influence. And so for me, in my situation, I don't think that my husband has an actual person as an exterior influence. I think it's his own inner self, like my inner self is the one that's influencing. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to again step into second person and say to myself, what is the inner self of my husband saying to him? And I'm going to guess that the inner self of my husband is probably saying something to the effect of, here we go again. So this is an interaction that that has come up several times. And his response to the here we go again is another form for him of withdrawal. So it's a withdrawal of he can't win, he doesn't understand, and so therefore he's going to withdraw again. And so those would be the arrows that I would add to the influence of the other person. And So that's going to be number 6 and number 7 in your worksheet. So just imagine for yourself, what would be an influence on the other person? Is it a person, or is it their own inner self? And what might be the interaction within them, within their own, that other person's perspective, from that other person's perspective about this particular context. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the objective. And so for me, in the context, the objective for me is to be able to continue to go and do activities with my husband, and so that we are sharing things. And I believe that for my husband, the objective is to continue to push the limit of his body and of him doing things. So he wants to go out there and push himself further, to grow and to expand his own skill sets and things. So whether that's riding motorcycles or hiking a mountain or whatever, his objective is to be able to grow. And so when I take all of this into account, the last thing that I'm going to do is ask myself, what is one area that I can change from my self side to change this interaction? And so if I approach this from a situation where I said, okay, so my husband wants to have a growth aspect, is there a possibility that he can have a growth aspect in situations where he's doing those situations on his own? And then the situations that we do together are not part of him trying to grow and expand and push the limits of his body or his skill set. Is that something that we could do? Another thing that I could do is I could change the inner dialogue of my inner self to help with me pulling back from the situation or pulling back from the interaction. I could also change some of my original arrows, the first that loop inner arrows between self and other, and I can change some of my reactions to the interaction or what my husband presents to me. And by doing so, I change that entire map as well. This is the meta map. And the idea about this is that we want to be able to use this to be able to kind of look at an interaction with somebody else without ever having to bring it up as a conflict to them. So it allows us to sort of map the interaction, get a clearer understanding of what's going on for ourselves, and then be able to make some changes for ourselves so then the next time that we're in that interaction with that person, we can test that change. We can make some guesses about this mapping of the interaction. We can make some guesses here and then test them with that person in the next time we have an interaction on this context. Now, the more often we do this in multiple different contexts, the better off we get with being able to step inside and view the world from other people's perspective, other people's maps of the world. And by doing that, it allows us to manage our own behavior, our own choice of communication based on what's going to be the best case scenario in relating to that other person. So remember, when we did the NLP for relationships, it's all about us being able to have the skill set and us being able to calibrate what's happening with that other person and change our behavior accordingly. So this allows us to be able to map it out in advance of that interaction. So I hope you find this useful, and it's a great way for us to be able to really examine and analyze interaction with somebody else and hopefully make some amazing changes the next time we have that interaction. Thank you so much for listening.